It's the 5th anniversary of the Arab Spring, but how much is there to celebrate? In Egypt, the country's first ever elected civilian president, Mohamed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood, was ousted in a coup following mass protests. And under his successor, military general Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, there's been a dramatic deterioration in human rights, according to Amnesty International. So, half a decade after the revolution, is Egypt better or worse off than it was before? To debate this issue, I'm joined in the arena from Baton Rouge by Dr. Raymond Stock, an expert on the Middle East who spent 20 years living in Cairo and now teaches Arabic at Louisiana State University. He's praised President Sisi as Egypt's Muslim Churchill. And Mohamed Soltan here in the studio, an Egyptian-American who was locked up and tortured in Egypt for 2 years as a political prisoner until he was released in May 2015, and whose father, a senior Muslim Brotherhood official, is still on death row in Cairo. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me here in the arena. Mohamed Soltan, you're an Egyptian-American citizen who grew up here in the United States, and yet you were arrested by the Egyptian government for taking part in anti-government, anti-coup protests in 2013. You were held for almost 2 years before you were released last year. What happened to you in prison?
We were interrogated, blindfolded. We had welcoming parties. I was beaten up on my broken arm for 2 straight hours. We were made to strip to our underwear, and our heads are shaved. Let me just take you 2 months after that, where I had to get the nails that were placed in my arm removed, surgically removed in an underground dungeon by an inmate, a doctor, with a pair of pliers and scissors, with no anesthesia, nothing. And after that, I started my hunger strike in protest of my illegal detention. And where I saw that there was no law there. The prosecutors told us that, the country's ours. We can do as we will. So seeing that and seeing that there was no way out for me and to protest that, I started a hunger strike January 26th. 2014, and until my release. In that period, I almost died about 10 times. They put me in a designated entire building for me, where there was no light. Everything was stripped away from me, and they started passing me razors and directing me where to cut, so that I can end my misery and theirs. They threw somebody in the room with me, and they let him die, and they left his corpse in the room for 15 hours until they brought him, and then they came and made me feel guilty about it. They tortured my father. They brought him to the same prison and tortured him, torture by proxy, where they would torture him and let me know what they were doing to him.
Well, let me bring in Raymond Stock, who's listening in Baton Rouge. Mohamed Soltan, thanks to being American, has managed to get out of there. But the Egyptian government is believed to be holding more than 40,000 political prisoners behind bars. It's been slammed by every human rights group in the world for unlawful detentions, mass killings, rampant torture, unprecedented use of the death penalty. You've hailed Sisi as a lion, I believe, as a Muslim Churchill. Why is that, given all the human rights abuses going on his watch?
Well, first of all, I think the human rights abuses are a much more complicated phenomenon than just the rise of a Sisi. Egypt has been under what essentially pharaonic style rule for more than 5,000 years and has an extraordinarily harsh and despotic military government running things behind the scenes, despite elections, despite the rise of a Sisi, who I think is not personally at the same level in a brutality or of harshness. As a human being, I don't think he's that sort of person. But I don't think that he controls, or is he taking enough interest in controlling also these sort of abuses. He's focusing on a struggle against 2 things. One, the Islamists, who are a global threat to impose these same sort of things on everyone in the world through their harsh rule. And he is also focusing on improving relations between Christians and Muslims, which have really deteriorated under the Islamists. Particularly, they were already deteriorating under Mubarak, but they had gotten much worse under Morsi.
It's not a battle between the military and what's called, it's the January 25th revolution and the anti-revolution. You can see that rhetoric in the Egyptian media. You can see that there are people in the new parliament that are clearly against the January 25th revolution. They are against everything, the ideals and the values of the January 25th revolution, of freedom, democracy, liberty. But just to get back on that, the Islamist part. What I have seen in prison from the recruitment efforts, the ISIS recruitment efforts inside of prison, and the kind of arguments that are being made, simple arguments. First of all, the current environment, as I told you, is unprecedented, okay? That kind of environment, it's already a breeding ground. It should already give us a sense of moral urgency to act.
I want to respond to that very much, because yes, thank you. I really think that, first of all, what happened to Mohammed and so many other people is truly deplorable and really disgusting. At the same time, and there is in fact some truth in the argument that this is radicalizing more people. At the same time, Sisi is working with a very blunt instrument, which is the state security services that were trained by Stasi, even by the Nazis, by other East European security services and the Soviets for many, many years under Nasser and his successors. These are inherently brutal people, and the methods that they use are just incredibly bad. And this is the tragic irony that someone like Sisi rose in this situation, because he's faced with a violent uprising, and it was not a violent uprising that he began. He's not responsible for their violence.
March 16, 2015, okay, we stood before Nagish Hatta, the judge who sentenced the Al Jazeera staff and sentenced me to a life sentence. On that same day, when we returned back to Tura prison, an ISIS guy got released, and my father and 13 others got the death sentence. That should tell you, no, what the Sisi regime, and I don't want to, because Sisi's a figurehead. The entire regime, what it's doing is it's fueling the exact fire that it's attempting to put out.
Human rights groups are pretty much in agreement on the human rights disaster under Sisi right now. But let me put this to you. You wouldn't deny that under Morsi, his predecessor, that was a pretty bad situation too. There were a lot of human rights abuses and abuses of power under Morsi as well.
Listen, I'm not going to sit there. First of all, there are no comparisons between the two.
I'm not saying there's comparisons.
There's thousands of people that have been killed. But I'm not going to sit there. I'm not going to sit there and argue and sit there and compare. The figures are there, and people can compare them for themselves. But what is happening in Egypt is unprecedented in the last 6 decades.
The vast majority of Egyptians I'm in touch with, and I'm in touch with a broad spectrum of people, support Sisi and think that things are far better, far more secure for the average Egyptian. They're not so secure for dissenters, and that is a tragedy and an ironic pity. But it is not a reason, I think, to withdraw our support from the Sisi. The trouble is that as America, for example, many people have talked about withdrawing our aid. We did cut off aid following the overthrow of Morsi at the behest of 30 million Egyptians. We now have restored the aid more or less, but with a proviso that they can no longer buy on credit. So they have turned to the Russians and the Chinese.
The United States government stood by the Egyptian people's choice. It stood by their choice. It stood by the values and principles that the United States, what makes the United States government
the
so
United States government supports Morsi, Raymond says,
no,
not Sisi. I'm just wondering, from your experience, what was your experience?
No, the United States government, President Obama stood by the choice of Egyptian people, but then even afterwards, the month I got arrested, Secretary Kerry was talking about Egypt's on its way to restoring democracy when me and 6 other American Egyptians were locked up for protesting a military coup.
Do you think Egyptians are better off today, 5 years on, Raymond, than they were before?
I think that they're worse off than they were before the January 25th revolution. I think that they're better off under Sisi generally than they would be under Morsi if he'd continued. I think that, however, it is bad for dissent, bad for those who long to see more civil liberties in Egypt. That situation has to be resolved before the revolution can be considered complete. Sisi, I think, is the best hope for the moment.
Sisi is the best hope for the moment, Mohammed, 5 years on.
Definitely not, and he will be gone soon.
He will be gone soon, in your view. Okay. That's all we have time for, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me in the arena on this anniversary of a rather remarkable historic event in the Middle East. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.